He wrote towards the very end of the 4th century. His main work that we'll be diving into is his chronology of the world. And since we only have a Latin version available to us today, is that Google will once again be our translator. His 70-week system covers about a fourth of his work. But before we dive into his system, is that he totaled 5,530 years, say it that way better, from creation to the crucifixion, occurring in the 16th year of Tiberius. Then adds to this, saying, as to the conclusion of 6,000 years, due to the year 470. So we've encountered another creation week model of history proponent. With his placement of the crucifixion in the 16th year of Tiberius, is that we can assume that he would have the birth in the year 5500 that mirrors many of our previous covered writers. He says at the year 6000 that, rounding up and killing the Antichrist, the amount of 6,000 years becomes a resurrection of all the world was still alive. Running streams of even 1,000 years in which the dragon, that old, the devil, and Satan is confined in the deep for him. So, we see that he is a chillist, believing that there will be a millennial kingdom following the Antichrist's destruction. After this, he says, after the 7th millennium year, and the year loosed out of his prison, and will go out to deceive the nations Gog and Magog, and when Satan has gathered them to the camp of the saints, as it were, to the battle. And the fire will come down from heaven, and all towards all men, and then there will be a second resurrection of all flesh. And on behalf of the righteous judgment of God, and they will be judged for not believing all of, but only in themselves, had no pleasure in works of righteousness. And after that, the sky and the land, the city is described in Revelation 21, is ready to descend from the heaven of wealth in which just live, and it will be a new heaven and a new earth, and they both remain in perpetuality, but the burns eternal, and just as God in heaven. Amen. So, he understands the book of Revelation to be chronologically laid out linearly and literally. With this type of reading is that it creates two separate resurrection events taking place. To rabbit trail here just for a moment, is that taking a linear view of Revelation is that you will typically have this type of outline. Then come Revelation 20 verses 4 through 5, you read, they, the martyrs, lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years, but the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. So you can see that the martyrs were resurrected, but the unrighteous weren't resurrected until the 1,000-year reign was completed. Then, in verse 12, you see the dead are now standing before God after the 1,000 years. This is how Julius and other commentators come away with two separate resurrection events taking place. Where this comes into play in our study is that the Apostle John is pulling from Daniel 12, 1 through 2, that says, and at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. You can see the resurrection language here with the dead awakening and being judged. The tracking here is the Septuagint translation that uses the word exagaro, that is etymologically rooted from agaro. We see Paul using both of these words describing Jesus' resurrection and ours that will take place. The word used in the New Testament for resurrection is anastasis. Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 uses this and agaro together, thus linking all three words together that can speak of the general resurrection event spoken about in taking place from Daniel 12. In John 5:21, Jesus said, "For as the Father raiseth up the dead and quickeneth them, even so the Son quickeneth him whom he will. And shall come forth they that have done good unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil unto the resurrection of damnation." So you can see both words being used together with Jesus alluding to Daniel 12:2. Now back to Julius. Now, you might be expecting here is that he is naturally going to place the 70 weeks ending at the year 6000 like Hippolytus and Apollinaris did. And that expectation is actually wrong. He actually has them ending with Antiochus. Yes, we've now encountered our first Christian author who doesn't interpret the 70 weeks messianically. Heretic! Now, before everyone goes throwing Julius under the bus for this, is to first realize this doesn't necessarily mean that Julius took a late authorship view of the book. You just saw that he is clearly a supernaturalist and was trying to calculate/predict Jesus' second coming. So the important question to ask here is, why did he place it there? But let's see his explanation, because it's likely going to prep us well when starting to encounter critical views. Keep in mind, we are still working with Google Translate, and some of the wording is going to get a little rough here. Julius dated Nebuchadnezzar's destruction in the year 4814 from creation. So we can plot this on his timeline. Before moving on, notice that there is 716 years between Nebuchadnezzar's destruction and Christ's passion on his timeline. This would put the first temple's destruction in 689 BC. This is over 100 years earlier than modern reckoning, and Julius had plenty of earlier historians to get a better approximation for his dates, so this is really eyebrow raiser number one. Next, he said that the 70-year exile began after Jerusalem's destruction, which we know is wrong because there were already two prior deportations that included Daniel. Eyebrow raiser number two. He then says that we come upon the 70 weeks of Daniel. Here he says, "The 70 weeks are cut on your people and in the city, even Jerusalem. And you stop and consider the result wholly, whether it answer the city and to build Jerusalem, until Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, that is, 49 years. So, he has covered the first 7 weeks, ending with the Mashiach Nagid." He continues on. "For the first year of Darius the king, and he ruled in the kingdom of the Chaldeans, who slew the king too, and Belteshazzar. Daniel saw the vision in the 21st year of the captivity of Jerusalem." Now, does anything from Daniel 9:1 and 2 say anything about it being the 21st year of captivity? No. And Julius doubles down on this by saying that it was 18 years after Zedekiah plus 3 more years of Belshazzar. How he got to this was likely by subtracting 49 years from the 70 years of captivity, leaving 21 years. That was his justification for saying it was the 21st year of the captivity, even though we saw that it is completely contrary to what Daniel wrote in chapter 1. So, we can now add this into his chronology system. He goes on by saying that the anointing of the Holy of Holies took place then as Zerubbabel the Mashiach Nagid, who came at the end of the first 7 weeks, and he even calls Zerubbabel king. The note here is that Zerubbabel was only ever called governor because Israel was still under Persian jurisdiction. And after this, he says, comes the next 62 weeks, i.e., 434 years, that is basically the longest city rebuilding project known to man. And I do say that sarcastically for a reason, as we'll discuss later on. Then, in the 141st year of the Greek Empire, that he says Antiochus came to the helm that finishes out the 70th week. So, we have finished out his 70 weeks system, which looks close to the actual time period of Antiochus's persecution. But, again, he is cheating recorded history because 1st Maccabees doesn't record anything about the 141st year. It does say that the Jews cleansed the temple in the 148th year, so maybe all that Julius was doing here was subtracting 7 years to get back to the 141st. And if you do that, then you can portray it as though the abomination of desolation took place in the midst of the final week, thus finishing the 70 weeks in the 2nd BC. I hope you see how all this is kind of prep for us when dealing with the critics. They do similar things to arrive at these dates, and also I need to remind you is that 1st Maccabees dates the years from the start of the Seleucid Empire around 312 BC, not from Alexander's conquest if you're trying to keep up with all the chronology stuff here. Now, where you just have to start laughing at all this with Julius is him saying that the Persians ruled for 263 years, and when you get to the 141st year of the Greeks, is that this equals to 62 weeks. But all you have to do is add up the numbers, and he's short by 30 years. And this isn't the first time Julius can't add up his own numbers properly either. Just go back to the beginning, you'll see him just totally botching it just with the Genesis numbers. But remember, there is a why to all of his madness here. He goes on saying that in the 174th year of the Greek Empire, that Lucius was a Roman consul and basically told the Mediterranean to back off Judea. You can read about this in 1 Maccabees 15. But the Lucius here is not the Lucius that Julius was referring to, because that one was a Roman consul in 151 BC. It's more likely the Lucius that is in 1 Maccabees was Roman consul Calvus, who was consul in 142 BC. But there's a reason why Julius made this swap. No differently, though, than we've seen other authors change which Darius they were referring to. Because he says, from the consulship for the full years of this, for they are the councils of the year that seek after, found to the passion of Christ, until the 16th year of Tiberius, 179 years were completed. So, he initially went forward by 26 years. This would approximately land you around 142 BC. That matches Lucius Calvus as Roman consul. But this leaves only 170 years between this and the cross, and he wants 179. So, he swapped the two to make up the 9-year difference. And the whole reason why Julius was doing all this was because, and therefore the device to Christ's suffering is 5,530 years. As to the conclusion of 6,000 years is due 470 more years. For Jewish people, the figure we all supports the settling of their ages. Therefore, the passion of the Christ, after which time the faith of believers in the resurrection promised by God's Son, must be completed 470 years to conclude of 6,000 years. That's right. His whole mission was to construct a chronology where he landed at 5,530 for the crucifixion, by which he could then predict the second coming on the 6,000th year from creation. So his whole 70-week system was designed to get this end result. Reminder, hit the subscribe button below, turn on the notification bell, hit the like button, leave a comment, and don't forget to visit us at justscripture.org. But in the meantime, stay salty.